Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us here on Oregon Legacy. Today, we have a special guest, and he is a Republican candidate for Attorney General. I had the opportunity to meet Will several weeks ago at a forum for the League of Minority Voters, and he had a really interesting speech, and I invited him, and I was glad to have him accept our invitation to join us. So let's go ahead and bring Will onto the stage. Will, thanks again for being with us. I'd love to, just start this interview off really quick here and ask you, tell me a little bit more about your history. I really enjoyed learning more about you. And I think as a Republican, you have a very interesting view on things. And sometimes I question, Mike, is Will really a Republican? But so let me give it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, George. Thanks for having me. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here. So, just that you give me this chance, I appreciate it. So I'm originally from, my background is I'm originally from Eastern Oregon. I'm from the East Side, but I came to Salem to go to law school. And after law school, I became a prosecutor. I was a prosecutor in Yamhill County. Then I was recruited away to Marion County to join their Special Victims Unit and prosecute child sex abuse crimes, also homicide, adult sexual assault, and domestic violence crimes. But my major focus when I was working here in Oregon was on protecting children from violence. Then I was recruited away to the national level to do child abuse intervention work in Washington, D.C. And from there, I was hired by a global human rights organization. And they asked me to lead multinational teams in Africa. And that's where I've been for the last 8 years, first in East Africa and then in West Africa. And most of my time in Africa was spent working with the U.S. State Department, UNICEF, and African governments to rescue child trafficking victims and prosecute traffickers and traders. And so I've always been in law enforcement. I liked the job I was doing, but each year when I would come back to Oregon, which has always been my home state, watching the decay of law and order and governance over the last decade in Oregon has been like watching the frame by frame death of my state. So I felt really motivated and duty bound to come back and run for Attorney General and try to bring some safety and protection back to this.
Earlier, I made the joke of like, I wonder if you're a Republican, really, because when I heard the things that you've done overseas, working with extremely poor communities, can you tell me a little bit about how that changed your life, especially in the criminal justice system, working overseas?
Yeah, what a great question. Let me preface it to say that it's a compliment to me when people say you don't seem like a Republican or you don't seem that like have a political background, because I don't. I have a law enforcement background, and I think in law enforcement you want to run for everybody. You want to protect everybody and serve everybody, and so the less political you are, the more qualified you are for the job. But to your point, one thing I learned in working in criminal justice systems in developing countries, both in East and West Africa, was that without the rule of law, without protection, nothing else works. I would watch these governments where they would, people would build these beautiful hospitals or schools, but if kids weren't safe to get to school or weren't safe at school, they wouldn't go. And the government might build a brand new freeway, but if there's robbers on the road, nobody will use it. And we're kind of experiencing some of that in Oregon right now. We're realizing that the foundation of any functioning government is its ability to keep people safe. And when people aren't safe, a lot of things start to suffer. And we've seen that in Oregon. Our schools are different than they were 10 years ago. Riding the Max in Portland is different than it was 10 years ago. Walking down the street, going to restaurants or bars or music venues in Portland and Eugene and Salem, it's just different than it used to be because we've stopped protecting people. So I think the lesson I learned overseas is how important, professional, fair, and just law enforcement is to everything else if you want your state or your community to thrive.
Can you tell me, as Attorney General, how are you going to be able to help the local municipalities? How are you going to be able to hold, people accountable, at the state level, that we start feeling safe?
Yeah. The Attorney General is the preeminent law enforcement officer of the state. It's kind of nicknamed Oregon's top cop. And so the Attorney General is going to set the standard for victim protection, public safety, and law enforcement across the state. And that, the state that we're in is in no small part of a failure of the Attorney General. So to answer your question specifically, right now, a lot of the focus is on how do we deal with people that are possessing and using small amounts of very dangerous drugs. But we need to focus more on who's selling those drugs and where are those drugs coming from. It's the role of the Attorney General to tackle or run point on all organized crime in the state of Oregon. That's drug trafficking, human trafficking, and organized retail theft. And these are all things that are astronomically high in Oregon right now. And so my first order of business is to make it exceedingly difficult to bring fentanyl and methamphetamine into our state, because right now we have a foreign drug cartel operating in Oregon in ways I wouldn't have thought was imaginable, 15 years ago, 20 years ago when I first started my career in prosecution. And we should all agree that people shouldn't, be making millions of dollars in this illegal drug industry off of exploiting addiction and crushing families and communities. So the Attorney General's office's job to take on drug trafficking in the state, and I plan to do that.
Feeling safe is not just a matter of, the crime that's happening out there. It's also feeling safe in our criminal justice system. It's feeling safe that, when we're talking to law enforcement, that we're not going to be shot and killed or accused of a crime that we did not commit. Can you talk to me? What will your administration look like? How will you help people of color have confidence back in the criminal justice system?
Yeah, what a big and important question. I'll start small, or not small, but I'll start sort of narrow and go broad. You're probably aware that hate crimes, the reporting of hate crimes has gone up and up and up since 2020. We're seeing more and more hate crimes reported, but the prosecutions have remained the same. Oregon has this great appetite for passing laws and thinking that laws fix things. And laws are just words on paper until somebody executes them, and that's what brings them to life. So we need execution of laws. We need to hold people accountable for hate crimes. We need to hold people, law enforcement officers, teachers, anybody who has a fiduciary duty from the government over other people that misuses their power, misuses their authority, need to be held accountable to a higher level. And that's the first thing you're going to get from me. And then secondly, when talking about working in or hiring a staff or filling out the workforce around the Attorney General and the Department of Justice, I've been leading a multinational team in 2 different countries. I've been working in multinational teams and have seen the value of taking the top talent from different communities and that top talent working together in a unified way, and how powerful that can be. And I have a passion for that in Oregon.
Well, one of my pet peeves in the criminal justice system is that we don't have enough law enforcement or attorneys that look like us, and especially like from the law enforcement's perspective, we have a broken system. And this is where a lot of people don't understand what that broken system looks like and why we can't get more communities of color to be able to participate. It's not that we don't apply. It's that for many people in communities of color, they get disqualified, by the background investigator. And, they go through this long, daunting process and they've never been criminally convicted of anything. And during that process, the background investigator has all the authority to disqualify them. And once they're disqualified, you can never apply again. So it's not like, hey, you just had a bad interview and, try again. Thank you so much. But it's pretty much over for you. That's the case for many communities of color. What can we do to help change that? Because only 1% of the population ever gets to be a police officer. I was fortunate to be one of that 1%. Attorney General, will you look into why can't we get more people of color through that background, especially when they don't have a criminal history?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate to hear that, George, because my experience was as a child sex abuse prosecutor, the majority of the victims that I was representing and standing up for in court didn't look like me. They weren't my gender, and they weren't my ethnicity or my color. And it was a big. I would be honest to say I was starting in the hole, because you're trying to develop trust with people who don't have that much in common with you. And so it's just easier for law enforcement officers from communities of color to be able to adequately police and represent and build the trust of the communities. that they come from. So it's unfortunate to hear you say that we're not doing a very good job of that, because that's just bad strategy. I mean, it's just not great victim protection. So I'm committed to doing the things necessary, not reactively, but proactively, making law enforcement a place that's attractive to people from all backgrounds, because we want to recruit the best talent. We want the best that Oregon has to have, and any hurdles we have that are unnecessary or archaic or are just set up to be obstacles, you'll see me to start to clear those quickly. We need talented people, but we need talented people from the different communities across the state. That's kind of a no-brainer.
So I want to sort of change gears here a little bit. I think when people think of the Attorney General, especially in this political climate right now, people are afraid, especially here in Oregon. We're pretty much, a very blue state. When we think about the Attorney General and the power that they have, I think people are going to be afraid of, what will you do? Will you try to voting rights away from people? Are you going to go after, abortion?
I think the success of any really talented and public servant-hearted Attorney General starts with being apolitical. It's a law enforcement position, not a law creation position. So in the way the democracy works is the legislature passes laws, and the Attorney General and the sheriffs and the chiefs of police and the district attorneys enforce those laws. And so if I start putting my personal opinion or my party's opinions into my position in ways that violate or are in conflict with our existing law, then it's the government of Will. It's not the government of Oregon. And so I strongly believe in enforcing the laws and doing, even if I don't agree with them, enforcing them and doing that well. And I would say, just honestly, you talked about, like, what do you fear, of electing a Republican to this position? Let me turn that around on you and sell just the opposite. We suffer in Oregon from a lot of things. I mean, we're bad at public school, we're bad at mental health, we're bad at addiction, we're bad at law enforcement. The list can go on. There's not very many things that we can claim that we're really good at right now. And part of that is because we have a single party state, and there isn't a lot of accountability in our state. And whether I was a Republican or a Democrat, one of my passions right now is to hold public officials accountable, which is what the Attorney General is supposed to do. It's the anti-corruption wing of the government. And then you and I have talked about, you have this serious problem in Oregon where we allocate a lot of money, and that money goes to the governor and the governor of the state agencies, and from the state agencies down to these different government or profit or nonprofit organizations to do the work in the field. And there's a lot of money bleeding right to left. If you look at the audits from the states, if you look at the audits from the Secretary of State, there's a lot of money that's unaccounted for, $5 million here, $10 million here. And it becomes difficult when you're a political person, or you belong to a political cabal, or you owe favors to people, to hold people accountable when they misuse their funds or they misuse their office. I think that there's a real opportunity here to have somebody come to bring the natural tension of a two-party system to hold people accountable in places of power. But my priorities have nothing to do with social issues or anything like that. My priorities are to bring victim protection back, keep people safe, make sure that corruption isn't happening, and make sure that state agencies aren't breaking the law. And these are not really political things. This is just common sense, good governance.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I think, for me, I've always been about bipartisanship. There's a reason why we have checks and balances in our system. There's a reason why our Constitution was built a certain way. And so I believe that we have to be able to come to a point where we start compromising, because I'll be honest with you, I don't think that the left or the right or the middle has all the right answers. I think it's a collective. I think that's what creating real solutions looks like.
Yeah.
And so I'm happy to hear, the comments that you're making. I do want to talk a little bit about living in Oregon. We don't necessarily talk about the issues of what's happening at the border as much as we probably should. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of crime that happens at the border that makes its way up. And I remember days when I was, patrolling in Arizona, and we were just like right there, front and center with the border and the issues that we were faced with there. But now living much further north, the problems are still real. There's still a lot of crime, a lot of things that are happening here. I think for me that what's most impactful is the slave trade that we're seeing here. We're seeing a lot of children. We're seeing a lot of women, men, transgender that are really being affected because it is a source of revenue for the cartels or for the mafias, like the Russian mafia, things like that we all know that live and breathe here, just like the Mexican cartels. Also, it's a revenue stream that just keeps coming back, and it's something that I think that we really need to be able to focus and put our attention on. What's going to be your approach to be able to help with not just the victims, but going after these people that are definitely abusing our most vulnerable populations?
Yeah, thank you for saying that about human trafficking. Thank you for acknowledging that that's true. There's a lot of narco trafficking that happens in Southern Oregon that doesn't get nearly enough attention. And then whenever you have a large amount of drug trafficking, you also have drugs and addiction equals vulnerability equals exploitation. And so we've seen this explosion in human trafficking in the state of Oregon over the last several years. And it's devastating to see human beings treated as commodities. It's just absolutely devastating. And fentanyl's made that really bad because it creates this comatose effect, and it's so incredibly difficult or addictive that people are extraordinarily vulnerable when they're addicted to it. And the human trafficking world is kind of screaming for help right now. And let's not also forget arms trade, like the illegal arms trade that comes as well as human trafficking and drug trafficking and the organized retail theft. These things are all tied together. It's all within this sort of organized crime ring. And if you don't actually go after the head, it's never really going to end. So I think the what doesn't work, and George, you know this, you worked in this, you know what I'm saying here. What doesn't work is to really target low level street traffickers when it comes to drug trafficking or human trafficking, because usually those are people that are in poverty, low income, they're not making a lot of money, and they're sort of manipulated into this shield position that when you arrest them, the people that are making the real money up the chain and are really engaging in exploitation are protected from that shield because they never really get in trouble. I think the strategy in Oregon has to be to work these cases up the chain, to take our time, be aggressive, and in a collaborative way, start to hit these organized crime rings where it really hurts, which is at the top, and make sure that we really hold people accountable and make it exceedingly uncomfortable to try to bring drugs in the state of Oregon. And I don't think this is really the point you're making, but I think it's also worth noting that you talk about the border issue, and all these things can conflated together. Like people will say, well, everybody coming across the border is this or that. And I think for the honest people that are trying to work that in the migrant labor that we're so completely dependent upon in Oregon, it's a real shame that it's so clouded by the criminal activity of the people that are taking advantage of that same channel, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you acknowledging that, because I think that there are so many good people that are crossing over the border because they're doing it for their families. They're doing it for a better quality of life. They're not necessarily coming over because they want to commit crimes. And there's specific cartels, and that should be the face of who we're trying to combat against.
Yes.
When we're thinking about how do we protect our community. So I really do appreciate what you said there. I want to give you an opportunity for some closing comments, anything that you'd like to say to the audience. But I really appreciate you taking the time and having this meaningful conversation. So I'll hand it over to you for any closing comments.
Yeah, I would just say like my three priorities are going to be, and just to circle back, one is really taking on, as we talked about earlier, that organized crime, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and organized retail theft that's happening in the state of Oregon. That's the Attorney General's job, and it could be done much better. And I have a lot of local, national, and international experience at taking on organized crime, and I plan to do the same thing here in a collaborative way, both with police and prosecutors, but also with community groups as well, and making sure that everybody's being brought along. The second thing is child protection. We didn't really get into this, but Oregon is just doing child protection is my background. That's what my whole career has been dedicated to, and we are not doing a good job of protecting children. DHS is not accountable. They're raising kids in hotel rooms, or they're fostering kids in hotel rooms. They're returning kids back to badly addicted parents, and the children are watching their parents overdose and die, and they're left for days in those homes. Online exploitation for children is like up 5,000%. That means predators are targeting our children, and they've never had more access with phones and iPads and computers. And we have to do a better job of protecting our children. If nothing else, we should say Oregon is great. We're excellent at protecting our children and keeping our children safe from trauma or exploitation. And the Attorney General plays a huge role in that. It has the Child Protection Division, and we're known by our fruits. And right now, we are not doing well at protecting our children from exploitation, abuse, and violence. And the last thing is just corruption. Oregon has a soft corruption problem. I think everybody's aware of that. A lot of money is thrown around. It seems like some people are getting rich and nobody's getting better when it comes to homelessness or drug abuse or crime. And you can count on me as somebody that's going to chase the money in a nonpartisan, dispassionate way, just making sure that the money that is allocated is going where it's supposed to go and not somebody else's pocket. So thank you. Thank you for having me today. I'm honored. It's a privilege.
Thanks for being here with us, everybody. This was a great conversation. Will, wish you nothing but the best. Remember, everybody, make sure that you vote. We have less than 100 days until the general election. Remember, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you again, everybody. Thank you so much, and everybody have a wonderful weekend.